Hi, everyone. In this episode, we're going to break down 5 ways shippers get tripped up when setting up an EDI connection with a carrier. To help explain the misconceptions, I've asked Aborn's Data Integration and Implementation Manager, Bill Muse, to join us again on the show. How's it going, Bill?
Lovely. It's a great day in the neighborhood.
Awesome. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience with EDI and how it has to do with your work at Aborn?
Basically, I do anything that comes data in, whether it's in the TMS, whether it comes from the customer, or whether it comes from a carrier, and make it into a way that we can report on it, see where loads are, all that great stuff. I personally like a tool called Boomi. It's a younger tool, and it hasn't been out there very much, but it's very cost effective. Maybe a little harder to do many things, but it's very cost effective for people who don't want to pay that much for it.
Awesome. All right, so let's just jump right into it and talk about the 5 ways that shippers get tripped up when setting up an EDI. So the first one you mentioned was that often shippers assume EDI is the same for everyone. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Right. You have EDI specifications, and they read like a friggin' textbook. I mean, it's not something you want to pick up and not fall asleep in the middle of the night. It's great for you reading at night because it will put you to sleep. It's not a very fun read. And everybody has a different one because they'll say, I'm going to use these small subset of what the EDI has. And if I'm not going to use this one, maybe I can use this for something else. So once you set it up, you think you've got to set it up for, let's say I set it up for STs, you're going to have to set it up again for SIA, you're going to have to set it up again for yellow, you're going to have to set it up again for every single carrier because every single carrier is going to do it a little different. And then if you use a TMS, you have to go with the TMS rules, with the SIA rules, with the ST's rules. So you can't just set it up one time and forget it. It's not, hey, I've got EDI, why don't you just connect up to me? It's not the same for everyone. Everyone does it a little different. It's kind of like we all have hair on our head, but nobody's looks the same. Of course, there's people like me that don't have hair, so mine looks even different. So yeah, I mean, it's not the same for everybody. And EDI is much more complicated than that.
Got it. Sounds like there's a lot going on there. And then the second misconception that you mentioned was that EDI will solve all communications problems. What do you mean by that? What are some limitations that you've come across? Anything like that?
So when I've gone out here, status messages were a great example of this. We call them 214s because nobody wants to give something an actual name. It's a status message. Everybody does status messages a little different. And so, especially if you go into the ocean and the air, they're going to say, I got to this airport. Well, great. Which airport is this? Because everybody knows, I mean, even when we fly as people, you don't go from your airport to your destination airport. There's 2 stops in between.
Right.
If you're really unlucky, you've got a 4-stop flight and you're just like all day in an airport. Well, that's the way freight goes because freight goes as it gets put onto a passenger airplane. Sometimes if you're going the lowest round, and it has to go here to there, to here, to there, to here, to there, because that's the space available on a plane. So you don't want to know when it reached the airport. You don't want to know when it got on the plane. Well, you actually do want to know those things, but you need to know when it gets to the first airport and when it gets to the last airport at the destination. It's not really delivered to the destination. It's only at the last airport. So you have an idea of when it'll be. So that's a good example of where it shows you a lot. Where it doesn't tell you is, hey, it missed the flight. It's not going to be there. So they don't send you a status saying that it got on the next plane. There's no status that says I missed the plane. There's no status that says, hey, there's a hurricane. We have to go around it when we're having an ocean freight. There's no messages telling you when something goes wrong with the shipment. EDI is great for when everything goes right with the shipment, but not as much as when it goes wrong. When things go wrong in a shipment, EDI is not telling you those things. It can give you estimates when it sends you a message. And then you can say, hey, this estimate is past my delivery date, but why? You don't know why. You're going to have to pick up the phone and call. EDI is a good way for you to know when things are going to be delayed and that everything is on schedule.
So is there any way to manage these complications or miscommunications, or is it just kind of being proactive about it?
As far as EDI goes, FedEx has a thing where they actually use the ability to tell you that there has been an error in the shipment. for the 214 messages. So the capability is there, but very few people actually use it. So you can have that little status that says, hey, we have a driver on the side of the road that the truck broke down, and we're sending you a status through EDI that is going to be late.
Got it.
Other than that, you have to have a good relationship with your carriers, your freight forwarders, your 3PLs, your 4PLs, everybody that you do freight with. You've got to have a good relationship so that they feel okay telling you when it's going to be late instead of you finding out when it doesn't show up today. That's not okay. There's a lot of different things that go into EDI, and there are a lot of great things that EDI does for you, but there are some things that you need to realize that EDI cannot do.
Right. And I think that brings us into, the third misconception you talked about, is that people assume that EDI can do anything. And like you said, it can't.
Yeah. I mean, EDI has such a reaching scope. It is huge in the financial world. It is huge in the healthcare world. It is huge in the transportation world. So it has this huge, massive subset of things that it can do. We use it for this much. Okay. And even this much, it does an okay job at this much. And what little that it does do, it does well, but it doesn't do everything. It only does what it's designed for. In EDI, we have several different types of messages. These you'll know as a tender. Everyone knows it's a tender. Hey, can you take this load? That's called a 204 message. And they will send a response back in a 990 that will say, hey, yes, we can, or no, we can't. So that's another type of message. And then there's another type of message, the 214s we talked about a little later, that says where it's at, where it's going to be. Hey, I've picked it up. Hey, I've delivered it. Hey, it's on its way. And then in the end, then you go into the financial side of things where the 210 comes into play, where an invoice. I want to get paid. Everybody wants to get paid. So we got to have that in there too. There are multiple types of messages you use. And to make it even more complicated, when you use air, you can have a 1 in front of those numbers. And when you use ocean, you can have a 3 in front of those numbers. So an ocean freight will use a 315 for a status message, a 305 for a tender. And air does the same thing, a 110 for an invoice. So it can do a lot of things. And you have to set up a lot of messages to do all these lot of things. But it doesn't do everything by itself. It's a lot of work to get it set up to do what it does. But when it does what it does and it works well, it is super helpful. Helps you know what's going on, helps you know what's happening, helps you know how to plan in the future, and keeps anybody from having to pick up a phone and call, keeps people from having to chase down stuff all the time. It is really, really versatile in that way.
Yeah, I mean, there sounds like there's a lot of moving pieces going on in here, more than I really had any knowledge of. So just going off of that, the fourth misconception that you mentioned was that EDI covers exceptions. So what do you mean by that?
So EDI, again, it does what it does, and it doesn't do more than it does. So exceptions, such as the freight was damaged when it showed up. There's nothing in EDI to tell you that the freight was damaged, where it was damaged, how it was damaged, and who damaged it. There's nothing in EDI to tell you that a driver delivered it to the wrong place. It just sent you a status message saying it was delivered. There's nothing to say that nothing in EDI that tells you the wrong thing that was loaded on the truck. None of that is covered by EDI. EDI is telling you what you're moving, what you put in there that you said you're moving. There's no pictures, snaps, robots, or anything like that following it around. It's just like an old teacher of mine used to say, garbage in, garbage out. If you do a lousy job programming it to begin with, you're going to get a lousy return coming back.
Yeah.
There's only so much you can put into an EDI to get it back. So it's not going to cover all your exceptions. Like I said, we have a couple of carriers that can actually send you exceptions that something's wrong with the load, and there's a small list of codes they can send you that driver trouble or truck disabled or traffic problems, whatever it may be. There's a small set that can tell you if it's going to be late, but it doesn't cover the exceptions of it was delivered to the wrong place. It was the wrong thing was loaded on the trailer. It doesn't cover those exceptions. That's still human error in there. EDI is basically to cover the human error in data entry, not in the actual delivering of the freight or invoices.
Got it. All right. All right, so moving on, last but not least, the fifth misconception that you told us was that EDI is set and forget it. Why is that a myth? What does that mean?
Everybody thinks, well, we set them up EDI. Why aren't they working? They were working 2 weeks ago. Why aren't they working now?
Yeah.
If you set up EDI today and everything works great, you made it through all your testing, everybody's happy-go-lucky. That doesn't mean that the software on the other side doesn't change. That doesn't mean that somebody turned on security on a server and now those messages are being blocked for some reason. There's so many different ways for there to be a problem, because we talked about it before. There's so many different kinds of messages. So the way that you bring them in, it can change. The way that they send them to you, it can change if they do a software upgrade. We're always trying to get on the latest, greatest software. So I said in the beginning, we use Boomi. Well, Boomi makes updates to their software every month. Seems like every week sometimes, but every month. And every time they make a change, I have to go through and make sure that it didn't break any of my processes that were making the files. So that's just one piece of software. Our TMS, which it goes into, makes changes every, I think it's 8 weeks. So 8 weeks, I have to go through all their release notes to see if anything breaks. So say in a year, just those two pieces of software that are involved, that's half the software that's involved, I have lots of chances for something to change. The other thing is, and it's ran into this week, and there's something every week, but this week I had a problem with one of our carriers. The appointments weren't going in. So they would make an appointment, they would send us a status message, but hey, they're not going in this week. Why is that? Well, come to find out, when the person was entering it into the carrier system, they were entering in as a wrong date. The date really wasn't wrong, but it was in another format. Instead of putting 07/08/2020, it was 7/8/2020. That's all it was. That little bit. Human error can change whether it goes in or not. There's always something to troubleshoot with it. There's always something to go for. There's always something that's going to change on you. And garbage in, garbage out. If it comes in bad, it's going to fail coming out.
So the only thing you can really do there is hope someone's monitoring it for these changes. There's no other way around it.
Yep, that's it.
Wow.
It cuts down on the number of people that have to monitor it constantly, because before EDI, we would have to be making phone calls to carriers. Hey, where's this at? Where's this at? What's going on? When is this going to be delivered? Now we get electronic notification of when it's picked up, when they think it's going to be delivered, and when it's delivered. So you get those updates, but that doesn't cover the exceptions. That doesn't cover when things go wrong, when something's entered wrong, when a system updates. There's always something to come back to, and nothing electronically is set it and forget it. All right. If you'll notice in your home Windows computer, Mac's the same way. There's updates all the time. Every piece of software has to be updated for security reasons or for new features that you don't want. So yeah, there's never a set it and forget it anywhere in software.
Wow. Well, that's for sure. I just had a quick follow-up question, and this might not be something you can answer briefly. I was just wondering, what is the main difference between API and EDI?
That's a good question. So EDI comes in a specific set standard that you talk back and forth. You send an EDI message. You can send an EDI message through FTP, SFTP, AS2. Literally, you can place it on the other person's server, and they'll go and pick it up, process it, and send it back to you. EDI communication you use for something you don't need immediately. So you would use EDI for like load tracing, load tracking. API is generally used when it comes to rating, because you want that to happen in a snap. So API uses a completely different type of files. And when I say files, API doesn't say you have to use this specific file type. API is newer and hasn't been picked up as much until recently. So there are 3 to 4 different types of programming languages that are used to do API. So you have to write it in this special script to put it out there so it can be picked up and return back to you immediately.
Gotcha.
EDI is something you want to send. I mean, it might be 20, 30 minutes before you get a response back from that EDI. You're not looking for a response in most cases. EDI does have set up, it's called an acknowledgement, functional acknowledgement, an FA, it's 990, 997, those guys, saying, hey, I got your file. And that's all you're going to get. API is when I say, here's my file, give me a response to something I need. So API has to be something that you need back immediately. That's why you would want to do that for rating rather than your tracking and tracing. Because the rating, you have to say, you're on the clock, how much is it going to cost so I can choose between these 5 carriers? That's when you'd use an API. An API is much more versatile when it comes to thinking outside the box and using things outside the box, because there are no rules on API.
Got it.
There is a thought of, hey, we should do it this way. And there's an industry standard that's not on paper for API. For EDI, it is a well-managed standard that everyone adheres to, but is so, I don't want to say flexible. It is so complicated that not everybody uses the same, and it changes every few years. There's a lot of things it can do, and it's pretty flexible, I guess, that you can do different things, but you also have to stay within the lines. API, you don't have to stay between the lines for anything. So you can make your own rules.
Oh, okay.
Does that make a difference? Does that answer your question? The difference between EDI and API?
Yes, that clears it up a lot. If anyone listening hasn't had the chance to hear the podcast that we had Bill on recently about the 5 misconceptions of setting up an API connection, you should definitely go to the Aborn website and look it up. It's great. I tried to listen to it before this, but that distinction definitely made it a lot more clear for me. And thank you, Bill, so much for joining us today. How should someone get in touch with you if they want to?
Best way is to email me at wmuse@abornandco.com, or you can hit me up on LinkedIn if you can find me. I check that once a month, I guess. Or just call Aborn if you have questions. They'll get you in touch with me. It's fun and a confusing thing. When you're thinking on an EDI, you can't just say, I want to set up EDI. So there's a lot of things behind the scenes that you've got to do. You've got to have a guy like me or talk to Klein Schmidt or one of the other third-party people to do it. So if you're having trouble deciding what software or what vendor you want to use, well, we'll be glad to talk it through. We can talk through what you can and can't do on your own, and what you should be looking for somebody else to do. So that's the big thing.
All right. Well, I will be sure to put your information in the show notes. And thank you so much again for joining us today.
No problem. Have a great day.
You too.
All right. Bye.
And that's our show. Have any misconceptions that you experience with EDI? Let us know in the comment section. In the meantime, subscribe and share our show. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. Rock and roll.